Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have another one of these annoyingly accomplished guests joining us this week. He's done so much, I don't know where to begin. He's in the chess realm. He's an accomplished author. He's just released his sixth book with Quality Chess called Reimagining 1E4. It is fantastic. He's also worked as a coach of a national team of Denmark, a correspondence player who's quite accomplished, playing in European championships as a correspondence player. He's worked with U.S. women's champion Sabina Foyser. Outside of chess, he is a computer engineer with a PhD in bioinformatics. He has black belts in karate and in Okinawa karate and jiu-jitsu, and the list goes on. I'm starting to feel bad about myself, so we better just bring our guest in and welcome Nikos Ntirlis. Welcome, Nikos.
Thank you for all this. I mean, I'm slightly red, from all you said. Thank you, Ben. I have to say that I'm a huge fan of the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I also forgot to mention that sort of you've had like a rise to fame based on your Twitter threads. I haven't been on Twitter much lately, but you share these very fresh opening ideas that actually have been picked up by many super grandmasters. Anish Giri wrote the introduction to 1E4. And obviously, Nikos is a very accomplished person, but FIDE rated 1900, so not like a grandmaster in the classical chess realm, but just full of fresh ideas and openings. And when I picked up Reimagining E4, I just couldn't believe how many moves there were that I wasn't familiar with, that I hadn't seen before, when it feels like everything is so thoroughly explored. It feels to me, as a non-opening specialist, like there's nothing new under the sun, but you found so many new ideas, whether it be H3 against the Scandi. I went straight to, as like a Sveshnikov and Accelerated Dragon player, I went straight to those lines, and you had something new that I wasn't too familiar with against both of those. And the list goes on of many pages of exploration, this A4 idea against the Berlin, etc. So my first question for you, Nikos, is, was there any line that you felt like you couldn't find anything fresh against in the course of working on this book?
Okay, that's an excellent question, and I want to go there in a minute, Ben, but I have to say this because, for me, the whole Twitter thing was an experiment. Actually, the CEO of the company I work for, we were working together on building our reputation on LinkedIn. This is the new thing, right now that businesses try to do, build thought leadership on LinkedIn, and there is some training how to do that. So at some point, I remember that I asked my CEO, hey, would you like me to do the same on Twitter? And he said, you know something, Nikos? I mean, on Twitter, you already have some people that follow you from chess. Then why not do chess stuff on Twitter to learn a bit? And then, I mean, for us, LinkedIn is the most important thing. So if my CEO hadn't told me to basically use Twitter as a learning tool for our company's LinkedIn strategy, I would never do all of this stuff. So you have to thank my CEO, and I have to thank my CEO, because the whole project on Reimagining 1E4 came from Twitter, because at some point I was sharing ideas, and many people were telling me, hey, instead of sharing random stuff, why don't we do a project? And one day I was sharing something on the Reti opening. The other day I was sharing something on the Italian. Other day something else. So at some point I put a poll, what you would like us to do, like N1D4 repertoire and 1E4, and everyone said 1E4, at least most people. So I started publishing stuff on Twitter that were specifically for 1E4. And that's how many of the things that ended up being in Reimagining 1E4 were born, out of people coming on Twitter and discussions and so on.
Yeah, and again, it's been amazing to see your stuff get adopted by these top players. Obviously, you've, in order for someone like Anish Giri to do your introduction, you must have corresponded with him or someone on his behalf a tiny bit. I mean, who else is following you? Like, Hikaru is not super active on Twitter, but I know people like Magnus have played your ideas. Is there anyone else who you were particularly surprised to see following you or incorporating your ideas?
Funnily enough, I don't, I'm not aware, and people are messaging me like, "Hey, did you see that Magnus actually played exactly what you recommended against the Sicilian?" So okay, that's cool, I guess. So it was this cool clip by Nakamura, where he, in typical Nakamura style, he's explaining one of his games against one of the top guys, and at some point he stops and ponders and says, "Actually, I played knight bd7 against the Catalan because I show a Twitter thread by," and he's looking up in typical Nakamura style, and I'm like, "Oh my god, he will say my name. He will say because I am the guy that." And he said, I don't remember the name. And I'm like, okay, Naka, it's fine. It's difficult name. That was the first time that I realized, hey, people are paying attention.
Right.
Which honestly makes sense, because for a club level player, a novelty in an opening, okay, it might be fun. And actually, I'm doing this a bit for fun for the community, but it's not so valuable. But for a top player, a new idea or a new concept is actually pretty valuable to explore. So many of these.
For sure. And again, you've got so many, like in this line against the Karo Khan. The exact variation is going to escape me, and this is primarily audio only, even though people can watch on YouTube anyway. But you say in it, I think it's after the Queen A5, in one of these positions, you say like, this line has barely been played, and people often play wrong against it, but as this gets out and it becomes more popular, here's what the engine says to do, and here's what people will do, and it's on like move 8 or something, it's not like move 24 or something where you're finding fresh terrain. So kudos to you. It's really impressive.
Yeah, with modern tools, that's actually a typical strategy that many top players are doing right now. They are allowing Stockfish to check 10 moves in a position, and they let it run for a long time, because if you give Stockfish a sufficiently long time to check a position, everything will be equal at the end, which means that Stockfish finds out new ways to play positions that we didn't know before that can be played this way. And with each new version of Stockfish or Lila, it only expands the horizon of different ideas that actually are playable. So it's not that hard. Today, this is where I'm going to. It's not that hard to find good ideas in the opening, playable ideas. In the past, people were obsessed with finding an advantage or finding clear-cut equality for black. Nowadays, that's not what we are trying to do. We're trying to find a playable position that maybe has some traps and puts pressure on the opponent. So it's much easier to find new ideas.
It'll be interesting to see how quickly these ideas gain traction, because one of the reasons I reached out to you was I saw a blog post from Forward Chess talking about how well your book is doing, having just come out in December. And so as these ideas start to get incorporated, I wonder how quickly the fresh will become stale. But we don't have to worry about that yet, luckily. And just to give a brief overview for listeners of some of the openings some of the lines you can expect. So it's Roy Lopez against double king pawn. You got this unique, as I said, 3H3 idea against the Scandi, against the Caro. You're playing the main line, but with a lot of twists. Against the French, you are playing 3 knight c3, but again with fresh terrain pretty quickly. The Petrov 3d4. I was glad to see that, because as I mentioned on the pod many times, I've mostly switched from 1e4 to knight f3, but a lot of it is just because I felt like the positions I was getting with 1e4, I just wasn't happy with them. And one knight f3, I could get a game more quickly. So every time I do see something like your book where I'm like, oh, maybe I can play that, it excites me and tempts me to go back. Although I have to say, the Roy Lopez, I know you call it like, the richest opening. It's so daunting. But anyway, I'm kind of babbling, but Nikos, I want to return to my question of, was there a particular opening where you did find it especially challenging to find fresh ideas?
So this is not going to come off as a surprise either to you, Ben, or the listeners, but the Berlin, the Marshall, and the Najdorf are really hard openings to find anything against them. against it's not a surprise that in the last World Championships, this is exactly what people are playing with black. So the Petrov is another opening which it's pretty difficult to even find the slightest of edge. But at least there, I found a very tricky, almost forgotten idea, which seems to produce a kind of interesting game. But yeah, against the Berlin or the Najdorf, oh my God, it's so difficult.
That's interesting because the Najdorf, obviously the Berlin has that reputation, and the Najdorf, of course, is known as one of the best Sicilians, and Jan Gustafsson approved, etc. But it is so dynamic that you would think, like, in terms of finding something to recommend, you don't have to worry about sort of the staleness as you would in other openings. Although, I mean, you're serving a wide audience. Before we go on, I could give my opinion, but did you have like a rating target range in mind for the book?
Yeah, it is very hard to work with people at quality chess, Ben. I mean, the next time that you will have Jakob here, please let him know, because I had in mind to make a really simple book, like almost like a TikTok-like of book where every line will be explained in a couple of pages. But when you have editors that are grandmasters, they're coming back to you and say, hey, but what about this move? And we should definitely add this part. So at some point, it became clear that the book changed the original concept that would have been a book for, amateurs, people that start now to start playing main lines, to more of a bit more advanced club level players. I do think that every player will have something to gain out of the book, but I would say a player around 1,800 to 2,000, I believe that's the perfect range for the book.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's something unique in the book in that the ideas are very new, which is something that's more appealing to more advanced players because it's not just the same lines they've seen everywhere else. But you do a good job thoroughly explaining things, and you don't go overly deep in terms of like the number of moves, because often the moves you're presenting are fresh enough that you don't have to go into 20 moves of theory because it's not like it's already fully established. So yeah, that was another thing that I really appreciated about the way the book was done. And so I'll be referring to an interview you did with Charlize van Zyl from Forward Chess about a year ago a few times, and I'll link to that as well. But you said something that really surprised me in that interview. Of course, obviously, I've interviewed tons and tons of trainers and players over the years, and it's become somewhat typical to advise that one should memorize ideas, not moves. But you actually pushed back against that a little bit. Could you explain your stance on this?
Yeah, typically chess coaches say, hey, you don't need to know the opening, you just need to understand the ideas. And I fully understand this, but this comes only after you have memorized the opening. So, I mean, ideas are great if you get at least, a position where you can apply the ideas. And I see this all the time with my students. Many times we start explaining to them ideas that come after a big tabia that they get after move 10 or 12 in the opening, but they never get there because they don't remember how to get there. So that's the issue. In fact, I'm not the only coach that I recommend that memorizing is important. There are actually many coaches that's an old Soviet thing that, hey, you should know your opening. And, in Soviet times, you had notebooks and you had to write down all your opening lines and the coach needed to approve. But what I'm saying is that you don't need to remember 20 moves of theory. I mean, with this, I agree with, the more trendy opinion. You need at least to reach move 7, 8, 10, which is not difficult to remember the main lines. That's
and again, and that philosophy comes across in the way that reimagining E4 is presented, again, because it's newer moves or less explored moves. It can be older moves, as you said, too. But more explanation of those moves. And we have a question from longtime friend, former guest, future guest of the pod, NM Han Schut, who actually did a review of your book on his YouTube channel. So I'll link to that, and I recommend listeners check it out. So Han says, and he's actually, for anyone listening interested in the step method, Han is an expert on the step method and has been doing some videos around that as well. So definitely check out Han Schut's YouTube channel. But anyway, so Han says, thanks for your book. I think it's a gold mine of fresh ideas for stronger players, and I wholeheartedly recommend it. And his questions, we will return to one of them later. But the second one relates to, can you describe how you just dissected the novel opening idea and the Italian by Niemann Kramnik, and what your conclusion is? So we'll kind of have to speak conceptually about this, and I'll link to the Twitter thread that Han is referring to. But yeah, what could you discuss? This might be a good lens into how you think about these things generally.
So obviously we all know the story of Kramnik playing an online game against Niemann and creating a video basically suggesting that Niemann was playing some sort of weird moves and, typical Kramnik style, suggesting probably his opponent was cheating, and Niemann came back to him and said, hey, why don't we work together so that you can see with your own eyes that I'm actually a good player and I can play at this level. So it seems at some point that they started working together, and one of the first serious events where, after working with Kramnik, Niemann played was his match against Carlsen when they played this online in one of these million online events that they play. So in this match, Niemann played the Italian and played a novel way in the Italian. So what is this novel way? People don't need the board because they will get it. Usually when we put our bishop on c4 in the Italian, we make sure that this bishop is not captured by the knight after knight a5. So we play either c3 to be able to play bishop b3 and bishop c2, or more modern players, they play a4, not to allow this trade. But the Niemann approach was to allow this bishop to be taken by knight a5. Niemann plays bishop to b3, knight takes b3, a takes b3. So that's the novel idea. It's not really novel. A grandmaster 20 years ago would say that's a stupid thing. It goes against every idea in the opening. But nowadays people are desperate, so they start analyzing these things as well. But the thing is that, in fact, this little pawn on b3 actually helps White's position. You can put it on b4 and you can play the pawn on c4. And it appears that this is super playable, a nice position. So I examined this in a thread. Niemann has played a lot of games on that, so it was very easy to dissect and analyze the ideas that they figured out in the opening.
Yeah. And I was impressed with the originality of the idea in reviewing that thread. And it made me wonder, Nikos, are there any players who are like your favorites to see what they're doing in the opening?
Yeah, absolutely. Anish Giri, I'm always very surprised because, and Gukesh, although they have very, very big difference in the way they approach the opening. And actually, nobody has talked about that. So Giri is a more traditional guy. He remembers a lot of things, and he goes from a novelty, he goes beyond. So you will see games by Giri where a novelty comes, but he will still play next 10 best moves of Stockfish because he has very deep analysis on this. Gukesh is a new type of player where he figures out ideas. So many times, if you go through a new idea played by Gukesh, you will see that Gukesh is not playing the best moves after the novelty, after the opening. But what Gukesh is doing, he's playing some thematic ideas. Let's say, for example, that after the novelty, Stockfish recommends rook b8 and b5 as an idea, right? Gukesh might play it 2 or 3 moves later, and we'll start with another move. This is because I believe, that's my assumption, that when they study a new position, they study typical ideas that come from this position. Gukis knows all of them, and he tries to work out the exact, with calculation, when a certain idea is good. So I believe that that's a novel approach in the opening. We haven't seen it before, like go to a novelty and create a database of typical maneuvers in this specific position, typical breaks. And you see this again and again in Gukis games, and I think that's really has surprised me positively, and I think it's a new way we haven't seen before.
That's interesting. Yeah, and of course, players of that stature, it might help that they have theoreticians on their team, like Gajewski, of course, and the whole team he had working with him for the World Championship gives him the opportunity to know things a bit more thoroughly. And of course, Anish Giri has long worked with a friend of the pod, Erwin Lamy, and many others besides him. So it does. I'm sure it helps. It's one of those things where it's like advantages accrue to the winners. The more success you have, the easier it is to have more success, because you're able to sort of reinvest and accelerate your skill edge in terms of knowing these openings inside and out. And now, Nikos, I was curious if you have any advice or if you could just share your own approach to working with engines. Like, are you using the cloud? And what advice could you give for amateur players listening and how to get the best from them?
Yeah, it's a bit of a funny thing. Many of these companies that offer cloud engines have approached me, offering me, things. The thing is that chess engines have changed a lot compared to 5 or 10 years ago. So you don't need a cloud engine these days, unless you are Gukers preparing, I don't know, to play against Alireza in the next World Championship match or something like that. Today's engines, they give you the best move almost instantly. In the old days of Correspondence says we needed to spend weeks in order to analyze a position and find the absolute best way. But nowadays, the new engines make this so easy. So instead of doing that, instead of approaching the opening as a quest, let's say academically, to find the best way to play, the best way to use engines this day is to ask them a million questions. What if this? What if that? More like having a philosophical debate against the engine. Taking a stance and saying to the engine, hey, you need to prove to me how you are going to achieve this. And the engine instantly giving you instantly giving you answers to questions that you pose, like a sparring partner. The functionality that I use a lot is there is a functionality in ChessBase and in other programs as well, where you ask the engine what is the threat. So in every position, instead of asking it what should I play, ask what is the threat. And believe me, it gives you so many new ideas, because if you realize, hey, why the threat is this? Let me try this move. Let me try the other move. And that's how you can get to many new ideas by doing that.
And now, is this just hitting X when you have the engine running, or is there like a newer feature? I have a couple-year-old ChessBase, so is there like a newer specific feature?
Yeah, you click on the recommendation window, and there is an option called Analyze the Threat. So, or you can put what we call a null move. You insert a null move,
right?
And then the engine basically gives you the. That's actually something that the engines are doing all the time. In their code, the way they analyze, it's called null move pruning. So, Ben, something that I would like to talk at some point is what engine programming can teach us about chess. So the engines, when they reach up to a depth, sometimes you see that the engine says depth 36 and there is, slash 45. Do you know what is this? I mean, are you getting, Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, but you should probably explain. So
Yeah. So when we leave an engine running, it goes up to a certain depth. It doesn't mean that it has stayed in this depth. It means that the principal variation, as we call, what the engine believes that is the best play for both sides, is at move 36, but thousands of other variations might be up to move 60 or something. The way that the engines go so deeply in many positions is it doesn't stop when it sees that there are forcing moves. If there are captures, the engine doesn't stop. It has to finish the line. So when the forcing moves stop, it does another trick. It says, okay, the forcing move stopped, but what if I give the move to my opponent to see if another series of forcing moves start? And actually, if it does, I have to go and check this out. Because many engines are blind and used to be blind before they do this trick. Because, the forcing move stop, but you're getting checkmated next move, and they couldn't see that. So at any point, when we calculate variations, we can say, okay, I need to stop here because there are no forcing moves to stop, but what if my opponent had the move? Do they have such a big threat that I shouldn't go there because I will not be able to meet the threat? So the same way, if you always check a position what the threat is, it gives you another level of understanding of what you should do. Should I allow the threat? Should I encourage it? Should I do something against it? And this simple trick allows you to, believe me, see the position in very fresh and figure out many fresh ideas.
Wow, that's really good advice. And so you say the engine is not that strong, but does that extend to, like, for amateur players, are they okay running the web-based engines on like Lead Chess and chess.com? Or are you saying at least get the latest stockfish? I know not everyone has chess-based, but at least find a stronger engine than that. Is any engine okay? Or does it need to be like a minimum viable level?
With any engine, you mean which version of Stockfish, or?
Well, I'm specifically wondering about the web-based default ones in like Lead Chess and chess.com.
Yeah, I think they do have, they don't reach after, 30-something depth, most of them. But Stockfish is so good that even at depth 30, it gives almost always the best move. So even the web-based engines, if you give them a bit more time to think, they're good enough. The other thing, what we do, Ben, is you should allow the engine, you should feed it with ideas. I mean, you shouldn't just leave the engine and take for granted what it says. You should always feed it with ideas and check at the end of the variation, after the moves that you played, what the engine tells you.
Yeah, and it's interesting your general advice about asking it questions, because I know you're a computer engineer, and that's sort of the advice they give about working with AI generally. So it's interesting to me that the same advice applies to chess openings. And as someone who obviously has a deep love and knowledge of chess openings, do you think that there are openings that are, quote, underrated, underappreciated for club players? Or is it more about sort of taking the curious approach that you do sort of across the opening spectrum?
Yeah, I do believe that we should have fun, right? I do believe that we play chess to have fun. There is too much focus on, objectivity, and this is good. I mean, anything is good. I remember the time when, at any point, even top grandmasters, they are playing weird stuff. So with the help of new engines, almost every opening is playable, what I'm trying to say. So, in that sense, many openings are underrated. And if you put your effort and if you have a fun project, I remember at some point, Jakob Agard asked me to do a fun stuff with the Killer Chess Training Academy. So I was trying to teach them how to play 1b6 or whatever, or some hippopotamus defense and so on. I found many new ideas and that these openings are not as bad as they seem that they are. As long as you you do some proper job, every opening is playable.
Okay. So yeah, and that ties into the more broad advice in chess study of one should do what they like, play the openings you like as well. And I know you do. We talked only about openings so far, but do you have like an overall chess improvement philosophy beyond just openings?
Make it social. One of the reasons that I like Twitter, Ben, is because honestly I enjoy it. Conversations start. People are we DM with each other. If something, I know that says for many people is a lonely sport and a lonely road. But if you make it social, if you bring people and you analyze together, if you try to refute each other ideas, the best players I have worked with, the most successful ones, were those that they were not alone. They were debating their ideas and their improvement with others, and this kept them motivated to work and so on. So I would say find a way to make it social. It is more fun anyway.
Yeah, fantastic advice. And yeah, as I said the same in my book, I think it's often overlooked, and like it's the number one thing for making chess like a sustainable hobby if you're gonna devote many hours a week to it. And Nikos, in terms of your background, like where did this love for openings start? Was it right from the beginning, or was it like a more gradual I think it's safe to call it an obsession given the level of output you have while maintaining a separate career away from chess?
Yeah, I have to go back to 2002, now 2001, when the world was completely different place. First of all, I'm a computer engineer, and since day number one in my university school, I wanted to learn how to code, and chess coding back then was becoming a trend. So that's my first. The first time that I was in touch with the world of chess engines was when I was learning how to program a chess engine. And back then, we were using forums. So I can remember some very legendary forums, that chesspublishing.com forum or the Talk Chess forum, when you could find people that had the similar obsession and you could spend weeks talking with them and you were doing things together. I made a lot of friends, by the way, at that time. So I like the community. What I'm trying to say is that the community of people that wanted to learn about chess engines, I loved these guys. And this kept me, wanted to learn more and become an expert at the end.
And it's obviously grown from there. And then your first book, correct me if I'm wrong, was a collaboration with Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard. Is that correct?
Yeah. This book has a sad story. It is a book on the Taras defense. So my own chess coach, he was one of the most well-known chess coaches in Greece. And he was coached by Efim Geller when he was a junior. Efim Geller was the coach of the junior team of Greece. It's sometime in the 80s or something. And
did he relocate to Greece? I didn't. Did Geller live in Greece?
I don't think he was living there. There was another famous coach, Munev, that from Bulgaria, that was living there and was working with the juniors. Many people might know Minev from his famous Rook Endgame book that Kasparov is quoting all the time. I don't know if people know about this, that Kasparov's famous Rook Endgame book is a little book by Minev, not well-known Bulgarian IM that became famous for this book. So back then, Minev was the coach of the Greek national team, and Efim Geller was giving some training camps. And he said to the team back then that some openings need to be part of your education, like the King's Indian, like the Queen's Gambit Declined, and the Taras defense. So my own coach asked me to study the openings that Efim Geller had told them that every junior should study, By the way, I don't agree with this, but anyway, who am I to disagree with Geller, right? So I created a repertoire on the Taras defense, but my coach died. And actually, he died during a chess game. One move before, I say this sad story in the book, one move before he delivered the final blow. That's a really sad story. And so suddenly I had very good material that I wanted to publish in honoring my coach. And back then, Jacob Aagaard had written a book a few years before that on the Taras defense. So I thought, I knew Jacob from the forums. He was an active member of the community back then. And I told him, hey, I have this material. Maybe you would like to publish a book and, mention me on last page, someone that helped. And Jacob looked at the material and he said, no, Nikos, your name needs to be on the book because the material is great. And if your name is not on the cover, you are not going to do the work. So I really want you to do the work because the book needs to be finished. So Jacob was the first that, I don't know, he saw something in me and he trusted me. And that's how the whole thing started, with me becoming a bit more known outside Greece.
Okay. Yeah. It's amazing because it's not, obviously your work speaks for itself, but there aren't a lot of players around our rating publishing opening books that are like eagerly consumed by grandmasters, but you are one of them. And it's a testament to the work you've done over the years. I want to talk, Nikos, also about correspondence chess a bit. So we were chatting briefly before we started recording, but perhaps a way in is for me to return to Hans Schut's Patreon mailbag questions. The other question that Han had asked was, and we should say, you were just playing in the European Championship. You have a funny story about that as well. But he asks, how do you think you can still win a game in correspondence chess? And more specifically, how could one win a game in the World Championship final? And I should do a brief explainer. Sorry. So correspondence chess, for any listeners less familiar, is engine-assisted chess without a clock. In the old days, people sent postcards back and forth. Now it's often done through emails, but it's a tradition that's gone on for many, many years, but obviously has evolved a lot because it used to be you came up with the moves on your own with your own brain and mailed them to someone. And now you get to, harness the power of these incredible computers. But sorry, I'll go on to the question, Nikos.
Yeah, I love correspondence chess. I love the community. I have experienced so many positive moments, but the sad reality is that the way that these days you win a chess game in the highest level is by accident. So I have won the last games that I have won is because, many times you want to play a variation and accidentally you enter the second move of the variation in the server, which is a blunder. Or, unfortunately, if your opponent dies, then you win a chess game. So what I was telling you before we started the podcast is that I was very happy after years of effort to qualify for the finals of the European Championship. And, I had in the back of my head, hey, maybe I will become European champion. But when the tournament started, one of the players, you make decisions which games you will really fight to win, and which games probably you will draw them very fast in order to gain more time to analyze the remaining games. So I made the decision to make a quick draw against a Latvian grandmasters. I believe his name is Avotins. I'm sorry if I say the name incorrectly. And a player that I respect a lot. I have many games with him. He was a wonderful human being who unfortunately died a few weeks after we agreed to a draw. So everyone else in the tournament automatically got a full point. And suddenly I had to win one extra game compared to everyone else, which really demotivated me. Almost I drew all my remaining games completely. So unfortunately, with the rise of the engines, correspondence chess is in a kind of a crisis. They really do have some ideas and novel ideas as well to keep making the whole correspondence as interesting. I believe in the next few years we will see some of these ideas. But right now, but if I need to give, let's say, a more serious answer to that, the way that you could possibly beat someone is by accumulating very, very small advantages. Because even though Stockfish plays almost perfectly, maybe in one after 5-6 moves, maybe you will not let it run a lot, or you might not be careful, or you might think, hey, I have another 15 games. This move seems good enough. So if you accumulate enough of these really, really small advantages, you might bring your opponent to a position to annoy them enough. And when someone is annoyed, we make mistakes. So that's another way that traditionally have been winning games, by being patient and really trying to squeeze the most you can. But it's really not enough, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wow, it's fascinating. So, do you have a favorite? You mentioned that there are some ideas of like ways to reinvigorate correspondence chess so all the games aren't draws. Do you have a favorite of the ideas that have been floated?
Yeah. So basically the ideas revolve around what happens if you draw the game. So if the game becomes drawn, can we have another criteria that, if every game is drawn, someone wins based on tie breaks? So some of them think that the tiebreak could be a player that achieved a certain evaluation from the engine. What I told you before is that many times I feel that I am outplaying a lot of my opponents, but at the end it is still a draw. So many people say, no, we should value this somehow. If you manage to get, let's say, a plus 0.30, you should get 0.3 tiebreak points, which at the end can accumulate, and we can see who outplayed the most, who showed the best level. Another idea is to, in ICCF at least, in the International Correspondence Chess Federation, we can also, in a way, suggest moves for our opponents. And if we find the moves of our opponent, we gain some extra time. So the idea is that, but this is optional. So I play a move and I put a conditional move, right? If my opponent plays this, I will play this. So the idea is to make this obligatory. And basically at the end, as a tiebreaker, calculate the times that you found the game of your opponent.
Yeah.
Which means that you are motivated not to play the computer best move, because your opponent will have better chances to find out your moves. So, this might create a mix of you trying to play more risky chess.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I don't know. I know that I've gotten emails over the years from correspondence chess enthusiasts, but to me it just seems like an uphill battle. I don't know. It's hard because it does have that rich history, and it's a beautiful way to explore openings. And I know a lot of stronger OTB players get ideas from correspondence chess, but it does seem like if
fun fact, do you know how many of these top players are actually winning Elo points? So you can see, for example, that, hey, we have a new number one in correspondence chess. By the way, a woman player was for a long time number one. Not many people know this.
I didn't know that, yeah.
Yeah, from Latvia. So many of these top players like Duda and a few others are going to play a correspondence chess tournament. And at some point, because the time commitment is too big, they abandon their games. So for ICCF, they start with the Elo, over the board Elo they have. So all these players in the tournament that are lucky enough not to have drawn their games early, they gain a lot of Elo points. So that's a bit of a funny thing, that we need to bring more over the board players to give us their Elo, because they will stop playing at some point.
That's funny. Yeah, to bring those fish in like Duda. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And another topic that I thought might be worth repeating that you touched on in your interview with Charlize is your advice for remembering openings, because I feel like you particularly are someone who could give good advice on this because you've gone so deep on so many different openings. So first of all, given your approach, given your relationship with chess, where you do some training and you're a correspondence player, but OTB isn't your primary emphasis, like how much do you personally try to remember openings, and what advice could you share for listeners about how to go about trying to remember lines?
I can tell you many horror stories, me being a second and getting exactly the position, the opening we want. In big events like World Youth Championships, pre-last round. If we win, we play for the World Championship in the last round. I have my player and we get exactly the variation we want, which is losing. All they need to remember is the key move. And I'm like, okay, now he will play bishop h7 and the game will be over. And they don't play bishop h7. And I'm trying to understand, what did I do wrong? Why they didn't remember?
Right.
And many times it is kind of my fault because this key move was not highlighted in the file. Or, it was buried in a sub-variation. And I thought, okay, obviously they will remember this move, and they don't. So there are many of these tricks that we know from psychology as well, that we can do to remember key moves. And that's something that if you create a file and there is a move that really you need to remember, you need to put diagrams, you need to put some words, you need to make it red, really try to make this move stand out rather than being buried inside your file. The thing with memory is that it's not one thing for everyone. That's the problem. So some players like a more of conceptual approach. I mean, in my experience, there are two types of players, and you need to understand which type of player you are. Are you a player that tends to remember deep lines accurately? Usually these players, they don't remember many variations, or you are a player that likes and remembers plans. So if you cannot remember plans, then go for deep variations and try to memorize them, one or two variations. If you cannot do that, try to figure out a way to remember plans. And you can associate a variation with a player. Always a story helps. That this variation. That's why in my book I always put stories. Kramnik played this line in an online. So you need to figure out what works for you actually and optimize on that. There are other players that they remember better if they play the line themselves. So we set up many training games in certain variations, and then we go through them and so on. But one technique that always works is repetition. And the guys at Accessible had it right with space, repetition, and so on. I don't know if I gave Charlize another nice answer. I don't know.
You mentioned stories in particular, the importance of telling stories, and I think it's a point worth highlighting and remembering. And Nikos, do you play much OTB these days?
I almost don't play at all, but I try to play with my team. So I don't think I have played a single individual tournament, I don't know, maybe in 5 years or something, but I like playing with my team. So because as I said, I like social things. So we go together. If I lose and the team wins, then it's good. I don't feel bad.
Right.
Or if I win and the team loses, I don't feel bad either because I won. So it's a good thing, and honestly, to be honest, Ben, I don't enjoy playing. I'm the kind of player that enjoys studying chess. Chess is too stressful for me. People can see games of mine in database when I play a perfect game and in the last 5 moves I blunder everything. Um, yeah, but yeah, I mean, I don't play much also because honestly, I don't have a lot of time. That's the
Yeah.
main reason.
I can tell that from reading your resume. Yeah. And a martial arts champion. Are you still active in that regard as well? Are you still practicing martial arts?
Unfortunately, no. But I'm not doing. At least I'm not going to tournaments. But I do practice, yeah, on my own at my house and so on, at my home gym.
And I ask this every time I come across someone who's very accomplished in another field. And so I can't help but wonder, are there any lessons as you reflect on how you got to be quite good at martial arts that you feel are particularly applicable to chess, or vice versa for that matter?
People will hate me for this, Ben, but I cannot lie. We actually have pretty solid evidence, basically for studies of 20 years now, that say that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to carry over skills from one area to another.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a kind of a myth that, I mean, it's not completely untrue that we learn things from chess that we transfer to other fields. They are not easily transferable, at least. You need to put a lot of effort and a lot of thought. So if you want to become good at math, don't play chess to become good at math, study math. This is what I usually say. But generally every sport has some common characteristics like, the psychology and preparation and visualization and goal setting. All these things are actually common in every sport and in business as well. Many business coaches read a lot of things that sports psychologists figured out because it's quite similar. High demanding and performing business teams are very similar to sport teams these days.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. It's more like stuff like recovering from setbacks. You might be able to apply a lesson that you learned, but the skills are not necessarily going to directly transfer. And one of my last questions, Nikos, is whether you have any particular, obviously you're affiliated with Killer Chess Training and Quality Chess Books, and they do outstanding work in both realms, but whether you have favorite books or YouTube channels, anything that you particularly enjoy as a chess lover.
I really love your podcast, to be honest, and it's not that I am in your podcast. I think that maybe I have listened to 90% of them.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate that.
Despite the fact that we see some new podcasts coming out, the fact that I like a bit more of your podcast is that it seems that all the others are circulating on the same topics, but your topics are always fresh. And anyway, I don't want to sound like a fanboy here.
Well, I really appreciate it. That means a lot, and I didn't even know that. So yeah. Anyway, go on.
So favorite books. Honestly, the level of chess books have risen a lot recently, and I very much enjoy historical books, like the Fischer books versus Taimanov that Quality Chess had. Oh my God, I think that I read them in a weekend. Or the Willy Hendricks books. Generally, books that say stories. These are the books that I enjoy the most.
Yeah, I think we're similar in that regard. Is this the I Was the Victim of Fischer, the Taimanov book that he himself wrote, or a different book about Fischer?
There was 2 volumes work by Karoli. One was The Road to Reykjavik, The Road of Fischer.
Oh, right, yeah.
And the second book was about the World Championship itself. That was fantastic books.
Excellent. Okay, well, Nikos, while I have you here, I know you've got a lot of interests. You've got a philosophy YouTube channel. Obviously, you've got your day job working at a software company. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about before I let you go? I'd also love to do this again sometime. You're a fascinating and quite accomplished person.
Yeah, I'm a bit sorry that I am not on Twitter as much as I used to, because in fact I just finished a Chessable /chess.com new course that is going to be out next week. And the problem with
Excellent.
me is that I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So if I do a project, I give all my effort there. But I will get back on Twitter also because I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy the process and the discussions there. And I kind of miss it these days because most of my Twitter says feed has to do with, scandals and, you
Yeah.
know, I miss stuff that are actually fun, and I hope that I will contribute a bit on that. But yeah, I mean, always something is happening. I'm always very happy to work for Killer Chess because we do like each other and everyone that comes there. Again, it's the social thing. We're having fun learning together. Um, yeah, I mean, at this point, that's more or less it.
Okay. Yeah. The Twitter thing is sad. I mean, I was finding the user interface and the ads to be so disturbing that I eventually I just stopped using it. And I'm like, I was the number one just Twitter fan and user. So it's a really bitter pill to sort of lose that community. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's ever going to be the same, unfortunately. And I know it's still going. It's not gone. But for me, it's like the negatives started to outweigh the positives.
Honestly, it's not the most serious thing that is happening in the world right now.
It's a good point.
So yeah, it's sad that I mean, hopefully things will become better. But yeah, and that's something that I believe in general that chess is an excellent opportunity for us to get out of the shit. I'm sorry for the word that is happening in the world,
That's okay.
and yeah, we
Yeah.
should we should not take things so seriously. I mean, yeah, everyone has an opinion, but at the end of the day, we are chess is a fantastic tool for us to spend our time constructively and instead of I don't know watching TikTok. So people should be less opinionated and yeah, we are on this together.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, well, once again, reimagining 1E4 is great, but Nikos's other books, as I said, I've been playing One Knight F3, and the Dutch is annoying. I know it's not like the most testing opening in theory, but I never feel like I know what I'm doing. So I went to your C4 book and looked at your lines against the Dutch, felt much better. So whatever opening, if Nikos has something on it, I recommend it. And with 1E4, one other thing I wanted to mention is for any E4 players listening, obviously you don't have to adopt the repertoire whole cloth. If there's a particular if you're just having trouble against the French or something, it might be worth picking up the book to have a line against the French. It doesn't mean you have to play every line he recommends in the Open Sicilian, etc. But it's certainly a fun exploration. So again, congratulations, Nikos.
Yeah, my last advice, do you know what is the best way to learn a very good repertoire against 24? Try to prove that I'm an idiot. Get the book
Yeah,
and
yeah.
try to refute me. The line that you will, figure out on your own because you think that my line is worse is the line that you will remember the most out of every. So try to refute the book, and you will have a fantastic repertoire. Or with
Great
black
advice.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's what leads to you discovering that curiosity is what leads to you discovering so many forgotten and new ideas. All right, well, we'll leave it there, Nikos. Great to finally chat, and congrats on all of your success.
Thank you, everyone.